Welcome to Irish Passport.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Irish Passport.
I'm Tim McInerney.
I'm Naomi O'Leary.
We're friends.
Okay, well to Naomi.
Anwar Fad Tim. This is your passport to Irish culture, history and politics.
Uh-huh.
I'm recording.
One,
two,
three. Okay.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Irish Passport podcast, where it is St. Patrick's Day and we are bringing you a very special St. Patrick's Day 2026 news update.
Happy
Naomi.
St. Patrick's Day, Tim.
St. Patrick's Law Eilapóra Connaíomh.
Right back at you.
Indeed.
So, guess who's having an unusual St. Patrick's Day?
I know who's having an unusual St. Patrick's Day.
No.
It is none other than Gerry Adams.
Yes. So, former president of Sinn Féin, Gerry Adams. In times past, he might have been wearing the green tie and the shamrock in his lapel to visit such elevated places as the White House or
Indeed.
Other seats of power. But this St. Patrick's Day finds him in a London courtroom.
Yes, it's quite striking because you will find images of Gerry Adams listeners on St. Patrick's Day sitting beside a very major figure from the US government, performing extremely important diplomatic roles. And now he is in court for something that he has always denied, and that is not only being a member of the IRA, but also being liable for IRA bombs between 1973 and 1996. So that's what this civil trial is about.
Right. So Gerry Adams, age 77, mostly retired from politics now, finds himself answering questions in court about this subject, which I'm sure he would rather not speak about.
Yeah.
The court case is that there are three claimants: John Clark, who was injured in a bomb on the Old Bailey in London in 1973, Jonathan Ganache, who was injured in the London Docklands, another bombing in 1996, and Barry Laycock, who was injured in a bombing on Manchester Arndale Shopping Centre also in 1996. They are seeking a symbolic £1 in damages each. So this clearly seems to be more about getting answers and getting Gerry Adams into court, I think. So they've been successful so far in that, and this civil trial about liability is putting evidence to the court, accusations from intelligence sources, things like that, which accuse Gerry Adams of having a senior role in the IRA, something which Gerry Adams has always denied and continues to deny.
And that's what this court case seems to be out to win, if you will. So the idea of winning this court case is, like, as you've heard, not about money, but more, I suppose, about trying to get Gerry Adams to admit, I suppose, or to say that he was a member of the IRA. It seems like that is what the end game is here. Very difficult for him. Now, this has been mounting on Gerry Adams for decades, this question. Yeah. That people constantly accuse him of having been a member of the IRA, which is always denied. Now, it came out most recently in a book, which was then made into a quite successful mini-series, Say Nothing, by Patrick Radden-Keefe. Excellent book if you want to read it, listeners. But in that book, Patrick Radden-Keefe interviews or uses a lot of interviews from what were known as the Boston tapes. We might talk about those in a minute. But basically from people who were involved in the IRA in the 1970s and 80s. Yeah. And Gerry Adams comes up in these interviews quite a lot. And from these interviews, it would seem like he was quite a big mover and shaker in the IRA. Now, throughout that book, Patrick Radden-Keefe repeats again and again, Gerry Adams denies this, that he says that this is not the truth. But once that was made into a mini-series that was broadcast on Disney Plus, I mean, for a really weird place to broadcast, like quite a harrowing series about the IRA in the 1970s. But I mean, each episode of that miniseries ended with the same disclaimer: Gerry Adams denies having ever been a member of the IRA.
No way.
So, that is 8 episodes that have been watched by I don't know how many people across the world who are allergic to the fact that he denies this in the first place. So it is become an extremely kind of mounting pressure on a level of popular culture and probably amongst a generation who didn't really know or engage with that at all otherwise.
Maybe that's the aim. Maybe if these guys could get some sort of court ruling that, let's say Gerry Adams isn't successful in this and they get some kind of court ruling, then they needn't refer to Gerry Adams' denial, but they can say that he was, a court found X, Y, or Z. But sure, we'll see how it plays out. Adams has said, for the record, quote, "I had no involvement whatsoever in the authorization, planning, or conduct of the bombings in which the claimants were sadly injured." He has reiterated his denial that he had any role in the IRA in the court, and he's also said he's committed to the peace process. So interesting, but fascinating to see. I mean, he was there in the court this morning. He turned up green tie, shamrock in his lapel, and he began the day's proceedings by wishing the courtroom a happy St. Patrick's Day.
Okay, all right. Now, that's not the only thing that's happening on this St. Patrick's Day.
No.
As we know,
somewhere where he would rather be.
Somewhere where he would. I mean, and that's saying something. Because where you will often see the leaders of Irish political parties at this time of year is, of course, in Washington, D.C. Yeah. Mind you, a lot of leaders of Irish political parties have actually decided not to go out of their own volition, including Adam's successor in Sinn Féin, Mary Lou McDonald, or kind of have to go but don't really want to, including the Taoiseach, Mícheál Martin. Naomi, tell us what's going on.
I think he probably does want to go, even given the circumstances. So it's awkward. The White House visit on St. Patrick's Day is a huge part of the Irish political calendar. It's a huge kind of diplomatic opportunity. The Taoiseach goes and presents a bowl of shamrock to the US president of the day. Yeah. And they get the visibility, they get to put Irish, interests to the White House. And it's also surrounded by a whole load of outreach diplomacy, meetings with senior congressmen, politicians, St. Patrick's Day parade, everything in the US. It's like, it's the full shebang, and the full kind of resources of the Irish government and state are poured into this thing because the alliance with the US is so hugely important. And every year, since while Trump has been president, this has been accompanied by a load of melodrama in Ireland, a load of back and forth about whether this visit should happen or what the Taoiseach should say while on this visit, because there's an enormous amount of pressure. Every year now, there's been an enormous amount of pressure to say something to the US President Donald Trump, criticising his policies, which are very unpopular among the Irish public. And this year, it's all about Iran. Iran is the big issue that's kind of overshadowing this visit. And in the build-up to this, we saw that with huge debates among the politicians in Ireland about what Mícheál Martin should say or shouldn't say, or how he should approach it.
Yeah, and this is a kind of new territory for Irish politicians in general, because this used to be anything but a positive. Like, the whole idea of this meeting in the White House was always supposed to be just something that could add net positives for both parties involved, actually. Okay. And like the bowl of shamrock thing, and we have talked about this. I think we made a whole episode a few years ago called St. Patrick's Day Diplomacy or something similar. But the whole bowl of shamrock symbolism, it's all very 1950s. There's a real like kind of Grace Kelly kind of air to it, like this kind of romanticized idea of haven't the Irish done well in America. Like this kind of beautiful link with the homeland. That's what it used to be. And I mean, still is to an extent. I think something that's really interesting to compare, or to contrast rather, this visit with is the visit in 2020 when Mícheál Martin was also Taoiseach at that point, which happened in the middle of the pandemic and it had to be cancelled. I don't remember, did he have COVID or it had to be cancelled because of COVID?
I
think he did have COVID.
Positive.
Yeah. The poor guy had COVID. But everyone, like, there were newspaper articles written commiserating with him. There was a whole rhetoric, a public rhetoric about how sorry people were for him that he missed this because he may never be Taoiseach again and it may never happen again. And the whole assumption behind that was this is a once in a lifetime thing that happens to you as an Irish Taoiseach. It's defining during your moment as Taoiseach.
A high point.
It's a high point.
Yeah.
And that it's defining in the history of Ireland. That your visit to the White House will be counted among, the visits of the greatest and latest people who went in the past. You're taking up the mantle. It's one of those kind of special ceremonial things you do as Taoiseach, which people look forward to, and he was robbed of that opportunity. That was the way it was looked at. And it couldn't be further from what is the situation now.
Yeah.
Now it is a situation where you have to go and answer some really tricky questions. You're under pressure from people at home, you're under pressure from people there, and that far from being a net positive experience, it could be bad for you literally at home because you say something that your voters don't like, and the person who invites you could say something properly insulting to you while they're there. You know?
It can all go extremely pear-shaped. And I think the occasion that haunts all leaders now visiting the White House is what happened to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who ended up being kind of like publicly humiliated and challenged and criticized by Vance, Vice President Vance, and also, you know, Donald Trump. And it was this kind of awful disaster that unfolded in real time. So things can go sideways. You know, everyone's really aware that Trump is a figure who's kind of volatile and unpredictable. So there's this real concern that things just might go very unpredictably. And then, like you say, there's these huge risks in terms of the public at home. So to kind of set the scene in the build up to this, Sinn Féin, the left-wing opposition party, said they are not going to go. They're boycotting it. They would have been present in the past, but they are continuing a boycott of White House events, which continued last year, which is over events in Gaza, so over the US support for Israeli policy in Gaza.
It might be noted that the US Embassy said they weren't invited anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like 10 days later.
Yeah.
So yeah, they wouldn't be invited, I suppose, given this, that they said that they would already boycott it. But anyway, they're not going. And also other members of the opposition have been publicly calling for Mícheál Martin to say something about this or that. At the moment, the kind of main question is whether or not he will describe the bombing of Iran, the toppling of the former supreme leader of Iran, the killing of him, as contrary to international law, as an international act of aggression.
Yeah.
Which notably the President of Ireland has done. So President Catherine Connolly has, I think in probably her most significant act so far as president, issued a statement saying that the US and Israel attack on Iran was against international law. So that obviously heaped pressure on the Taoiseach just about a week before he was due to visit the White House, and clearly put the government in somehow like a slightly uncomfortable position. It's part of this traditional row that goes on between the president and the government over who's in charge of foreign policy. But it's certainly not the line, I don't think, that Mícheál Martin is going to be taking. And we can see that in the build up to this visit from, you know, what we've heard.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as we are recording, Mícheál Martin is literally in a room with JD Vance right now. And he's going to be meeting Trump later on in an hour or two. And then later on tonight, he's going to be doing the Shamrock ceremony. So it's a full day of diplomacy.
Full gauntlet.
A real full gauntlet. He's going to be presenting in front of the Congress, the US Congress as well at the same time. It's a full gauntlet for him. But I imagine for a lot of people, like the people in the Congress, are saying, oh, that's just another thing in our meeting schedule and we're moving on to something else quite quick. I mean, the way this has gone for the last few years, there has been a sense in the room that people like JD Vance or Donald Trump are like, sorry, who are you again? That was definitely the vibe that you get, that I think was a bit disarming. That's not the right word, but a little bit unnerving rather, for Mícheál Martin in the past. But this time he's going to be more prepared for that, right? He knows at least what he's getting himself in for.
But definitely careful thought has been put into this visit. And we can see that because just 6 days ago, the Wall Street Journal ran this story which said Ireland's gift to Trump, this was the headline, Ireland's gift to Trump, shamrocks and a $6.1 billion investment pledge. So basically what they've done, what the government has done, is talk to all sorts of Irish businesses that have investments in the US, and they've added up all the investments they were planning to make.
Oh my God.
Into a big number that they then announced to Trump, saying Ireland's investing $6.1 billion in the US. So we know that's the kind of thing that Donald Trump likes, to hear a big number, and then he can go out afterwards and say Ireland's investing this amount, and like he's really happy and he'll credit himself with it. Now this is stuff that would have been done anyway, right? So it's not like government money or something like that. It's the value of investment by Irish businesses in the US. But the fact that the Wall Street Journal have reported it indicates an underlying strategy here, because they've given this story to a newspaper where they hope this will be noticed, by the Washington political establishment, and they hope this message will reach Trump. That's what they're trying to do.
Right.
Flatter him, show him big numbers, that he's getting big numbers of money, and avoid directly criticizing him. That seems to be a watchword at the moment among European politicians, not to directly criticize Trump when they're in the room with him.
Don't poke the bear.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I suppose there's just nothing good that's going to come of it, right? He'll just throw a tantrum and it will just be bad for everyone, including himself, probably.
Well, he has just such power to do damage.
Yeah.
I mean, out of kind of your own consistency, you might just want to be honest with the guy about what he's doing.
Right.
But, the fact is that he can come out the next day and, as we've seen time and time again, announce a trade embargo. Like, he's not going to trade with you anymore, or he's imposing a new tariff, or, something. He could do something extremely damaging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as we've talked about in previous news updates, actually, something damaging to Ireland could be catastrophic, because Ireland is so, at the moment, so kind of vulnerably dependent on US investment. And we did talk before Christmas about how the Irish government has recognized this and is trying to diversify, but I mean, they haven't had time quite yet to get out from under that umbrella. So if Trump does decide something analogous to a trade embargo in Ireland, it could just completely sink the economy, right, in one fell swoop.
It could be. So something like putting tariffs specifically on Ireland is complicated, because we're part of the EU, so it would have to be on all of the single market together.
Right.
But there are ways of doing it. So you can target specifically Irish goods, hypothetically, like whiskey, Jameson. Sorry, I don't want to give anyone ideas, but you could do that. You could list products that specifically come from Ireland, if you were wanting to be really deliberate about it. But something that potentially could be more damaging is if someone told Trump how much money the US multinationals are paying into Irish coffers on profits that arguably could be declared somewhere else. So Ireland obviously have this tax regime which makes it attractive for multinationals to claim profits there. So US multinationals on paper are making enormous sums in Ireland, out of step with the population size. And many other countries think that really that money ought to be taxed by them. So, we've had a huge tax intake of corporate tax receipts every year, growing and growing in a mad way. And it seems to be invulnerable to like other kind of economic trends. The concern would be that Trump could change something to do with the US tax code and force multinationals to repatriate that money, for example.
Right.
And that would gut the the tax income of the Irish state at a single stroke. So he could probably do that overnight. So nobody forward this podcast to him. Okay. But that's the kind of context to why this visit is so closely watched and tense for the Irish Taoiseach.
Yeah, I mean, this is a it's a real tightrope to walking. This dangerous child holding a gun, basically. Just how do you get the gun out of his hand, without him pulling the trigger? This is constant, right? So kind of trying to get him to look somewhere else so that he won't get the idea in his head to do something enormously damaging must be so stressful for people like Mícheál Martin. There's that, okay? He's using reverse psychology on Trump to make him look elsewhere and basically relying on his ignorance or uninformedness in order to survive as an economy. That's pretty bad in the first place. But then you have this huge voice at home saying, no, tell him this and don't let him do this, and tell him this and don't let him do this. And if you don't tell him, then you're a coward and you have failed us as your voters. I mean, that's a lot now. Now, in the past, Trump hasn't particularly heeded these pressures at home to be bolshere to Trump. I suppose in the end of the day, it's not going to serve him any better. Like you said, criticizing him doesn't get you anywhere. But what are these things? Now, what are the calls that have been put on him from a domestic sphere about what to do with this meeting?
I think the key one now is calling out the attack on Iran. That would be a crucial one because, Catherine Connolly, the president, just said that 6 days ago. So obviously the pressure would be on Mícheál Martin to also do that. Some European leaders have done so, others have not, and we'll get into that. The kind of choices and how the EU is faring with this. And another one would be Gaza as well. I mean, just to appeal to Trump to to stop the ongoing killings in Gaza, and rethink policy with Israel. But I don't think that's really going anywhere from what we can see anyway. Would you like to hear Mícheál Martin walking the tightrope, Tim?
Let's hear him.
I have a clip. Here he is on Fox News answering some of these questions.
Of the US-Europe relationship. Yeah, Ireland, in particular because of our economic outlook and philosophy, has been a bit of a bridge and an access point for many US companies into the European market. I think in terms of all wars create uncertainty, and there is a concern in terms of this. On the other hand, everyone has acknowledged that you cannot have a rogue state like Iran getting control of nuclear weapons, and it was a very, very repressive regime. From the Irish perspective, we prefer peaceful resolution of conflict, if that's possible, and we want. We ultimately believe in diplomacy and dialogue because we had war ourselves on the island of Ireland. There was a terrible 30-year conflict, and we learned a lot in terms of how to resolve conflict.
I think there's so much to unpack there.
Yeah.
So he's the kind of, we would prefer diplomacy. And then he sort of like pivots back to reminding everyone that Ireland once had the Troubles, which is kind of like, thrumming the heartstrings of the US audience, why they care about Ireland. Oh, yeah, they're those guys, and like because the US is so invested in the peace process. So it's kind of, I think what we see in that clip, I'm almost amazed with how many of the key talking points that the the Irish embassy in Washington would want Mícheál Martin to hit, how many he's managed to hit in about 45 seconds. Like, the guy has become really quite adept at doing this. Like, he's been Taoiseach quite a while now. And he was just like, this was just like, if you had kind of Irish diplomacy bingo, like you just filled your whole sheet in about 45 seconds. It's like ties with the US, economic ties. It's a way for US people to invest in Europe. It's the bridge to Europe, and we prefer diplomacy, but we're not going to say it too loudly. And we had the Troubles. Remember, it's kind of it's almost fascinating to unpick.
It is interesting use of the past tense when he's talking about the regime in Iran. It was an oppressive regime, he said. It's not quite gone yet.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
very interesting. Now, speaking of which, this position that Mícheál Martin has to take really is all tied up with Ireland's neutrality, which is coming under the microscope again for as many times in as many years, basically. Yeah. Because, of course, we're looking at what could possibly explode into World War III, or, as many commentators have said, what perhaps is already World War III and has been kind of begun a while ago and is just getting into its next phases. What has been said in Ireland about Iran? Of course, Ireland in particular might be looked at because of the landing space in Shannon Airport, which was used during the Iraq War. Will it be used in the Iran War? What do we know?
So it's really interesting. I mean, I would say the attack on Iran is universally unpopular across Europe. That would be among both the public and also governments. What varies is the willingness of leaders to openly express criticism about it.
Yeah.
So you have kind of a spectrum of extremely supine and then kind of almost like quiet support or indirect support of the war to open criticism, and open criticism is the rarer position to take. And you also have like the fact that because NATO still exists and there is like a formal military alliance between like most European countries and the US, you have shared military infrastructure, and you see some of these countries that might have been reluctant at the beginning but getting drawn into the war, like the UK, for example. Iran sent drone strikes against a UK military base, an air base in Cyprus, and also has attacked French troops. I think there's been the death of a French soldier, and even though I don't think any European leader would have chosen this war, and they look at it pretty poorly, they are nevertheless getting drawn into it through things like this, which was kind of foreseeable. Now, Ireland obviously in a slightly bit different position, as you say, neutral, not a military power whatsoever, but we do have a very important refueling point for the US military, which is Shannon. Now, the Irish government has said that Shannon is not being used for the attacks on Iran.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that the US military isn't using it, though.
Yeah.
So it can still be used for, moving troops or refueling or whatever. It's just that, like, if there's an actual bombing campaign on Iran, they're not taking off from Shannon airports. That's basically what that means. It's similar, actually. A number of other European countries are in a similar situation. It's still indirect support,
Yeah.
It's indirect facilitation, I suppose.
Facilitation,
Yeah.
Making it possible.
Yeah.
And which also kind of begs the question of how do you make it impossible? Or, if you were to say that Shannon Airport will not be used in order to further this war from now on, would that involve a complete ban on US military passing through? I mean, it would have to, right, really, from that point of view.
In genteel times, you'd merely have to announce it and it would be respected, but we're not living in genteel times and we don't really have any power to enforce that.
Yeah.
So what would actually stop the US from simply landing there?
Well, this is the thing, right? So, heartthrob and dreamy left-wing president Pedro Sanchez, Prime Minister rather, of Spain, has been one of the vocal opponents to this war. He's stood up to Trump. Trump has had a little hissy fit about it a few times, and it's creating quite a wonderful media landscape, I suppose, to fawn over Pedro Sanchez. Rich pickings. Yeah. But one of the things that Trump said, so Pedro Sanchez said that Trump is not allowed to use some of the military bases that the US has traditionally used for the same journey, right? Getting across Europe to the east. And Trump said, quite more or less verbatim, we'll use them if we want to use them. He can't stop us. Yeah. This is, who knows how sincere he is or how possible it is for him to do this. I'm sure it perfectly is. But even if he made the same statement about Ireland, the statement itself would be such a destructive thing to neutrality because we would have to react to that surely as a country and say, what do we do now? What does this mean for us as a neutral country? And even if it never happened, just the idea that we need to plan for this would put us in a very awkward situation, surely.
I don't know what we would be able to do about it.
Yeah.
But I think all over Europe, governments are grappling with this difficult problem, which is like, oh, hang on, what if they're not really our friends?
Yeah.
These guys in Washington. And you can see that, like, European countries are suffering from their alliance with the US. And it's kind of forcing them into positions and taking actions which are not really prioritizing their own interests. Like key ones would be having to send feckin' aircraft carriers down into the Mediterranean towards the Suez Canal to try and deal with the fallout of this war, which France has had to do. Like, this is not really what France wants to be prioritizing now. It wasn't a problem that existed before. It's a problem that's just been created now by the US and by Israel. And if while thinking clearly, when the European Union has the headspace to clearly think, their priority is on Ukraine. It's not on this war in the Middle East. It's on preventing Russian invasion from coming any more close to their border, which is extremely close to and already affecting their interests enormously. So that is where they, their interests dictate their military resources should be focused on all of their diplomatic efforts, and this is a complete distraction to that.
Like one of many, right? I mean, distraction is the wrong word, but
diversion.
Like catastrophes of global import have happened once a year for the last 3 years now, effectively, right? So we have Gaza, and then we had Venezuela, and now we have this. Like one after another, and in each one we have similar scenarios of all these countries saying, how do we react to this? What's the way out of this?
Right.
And in each one, Trump has kind of come out on top in the sense that they all end up saying, well, we can't do anything because, like, he's like a toddler with a gun.
He's just not shameable,
Right.
Not persuadable.
He's just this rogue king.
And he's talking about more, right? Still talking about Greenland. Now he's talking about Cuba.
I forgot about Greenland. We made a whole episode on fucking Greenland.
Yeah. We moved on to
Greenlandic, by the way. I need to apologize to the people of Greenland because we called them Greenlanders. No, we called it Greenlander as an adjective. It's Greenlandic.
Oh, sorry, guys.
Yes.
Okay.
That was brought to my attention. But back to Iran. Now,
Iran,
hold on. Another major aspect of this is, of course, the increasing and currently kind of running out of control issue of oil, leaving Iran to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about maybe the effect on the economy in a minute, because you mentioned Russia there, one of the direct effects is, of course, Trump lifting some of the previous sanctions on Russia so that he can get oil from Russia while he presumes that he'll wait out this issue with Iran. So the war with Iran is actually freeing up Russia and giving them power and powering their economy, which is, it's just mad, the consequences of this.
They're making much more revenue now because they're able to sell their oil for much more because, the supply has decreased. As many listeners will have heard, over the last few weeks, suddenly we're all very familiar with the Strait of Hormuz, the geographic choke point, which for centuries and centuries and centuries has been this vital strip. It's like a little part where a big strait narrows, basically, where vital minerals and vital supplies has to pass through, and control over it is this long-running issue. It's one of the aces that Iran has to play. There's talk now that Iran is mining the Strait of Hormuz. About 20% of the world's oil usually passes through there. So any interruption to trade causes the oil price to skyrocket, and the knock-on effects are to increase inflation, increase prices all over the world. Gas, energy costs, it has a huge impact on everything else. Everything becomes more expensive to transport. And we can see that, for example, my mother needed to refill her oil tank.
For heating.
For heating. Many people in Ireland rely on oil for heating. It heats the water, so it's what's provided you with hot water. And a literal tank vehicle comes and puts oil into your tank in order to do it. And this is very, very common in Ireland. I don't know what percentage of households it is, but it's a very high one. And she was going to book it, and then the US and Israel attacked Iran, and the price of refilling the tank in 24 hours due to that attack, from the time she checked to the next time when she went to book it, had doubled.
Right.
It went up 100%, and that was the case across Ireland, and it became a massive issue in the Dáil. And this is just at the point when governments the public was starting to feel that maybe inflation was getting more under control. So we'd had years of really high inflation and this cost of living crisis across Europe, which has put governments under pressure and led to political instability and misery for many, many people who are struggling with costs because wages are just not keeping up with the cost of things in the supermarket. And then this happens, which has the ability to bring back the really high level of inflation, and not in a way that's very easily fixable. Yeah.
And not in a way that's going away anytime soon either, which is 10 times more scary. We're a few days into this, quite literally.
I know, yeah.
So this is the first days it's gone up by 100%.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that commentators come back to again and again with this war that Trump has started with Iran, that there's no logical end point to it. There's no obvious way how to get out of it, basically. Yeah. So, if, like you say, the withholding of oil is this ace card, I don't want to say trump card, that Iran has, that's going to be something that's long-term, surely.
Yeah, and it seems that this was all thought out in advance, because obviously the Iranian regime had reason to think that it was in peril, given, that Israel often kind of toyed with the idea of trying to go in. It seems that they had this strategy, which is to attack the infrastructure, the oil and gas infrastructure of neighboring Gulf countries, particularly those which are allied with Washington, make them pay for that alliance, very deliberately cause these huge repercussions on global markets, so everyone feels the cost of this, and try and increase the pressure on Washington to change course. And it seems that their strategy in the meantime is just to hold on, so the former supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed almost immediately, but they have now elected his son as the next supreme leader, who by all accounts is even more hardline and is also younger, so has more of a ruling span ahead of him, and much of the regime's ability to respond, certainly militarily, remains intact. And I just read there, that the US had been making statements that Iran was going to sign a deal or something like that. And the statement from Iran was, no, Israel and the US need to be brought to their knees first. So that doesn't sound like a regime that is going to come to the table anytime soon.
Yeah.
And their actions reflect that. I mean, they're kind of, they're burning bridges with many of their allies by attacking them. They're throwing the kitchen sink at their defense.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, well, listen, we could talk all day about the war in Iran, but we need to focus in on Ireland's place in this. So, as a common EU response, and okay, well, A, as a common EU response, and B, as an outlier, being neutral.
Mm-hmm.
How can Ireland address this? Like, we're entering into World War III, let's say. Where does Ireland stand in this?
So that's the thing. Without an easy exit point,
Mm-hmm.
and with so much peril and so much price to pay, this could be something disastrous. Like, it could be the start of, another war in Iraq or something worse. So we don't really know. I think, unfortunately, the response to this across Europe has been very much shaped by fear. So fear of upsetting Trump is primary. So Pedro Sanchez openly criticized the invasion, outright called it illegal, which, it's pretty obvious that it is. And the response was that the US and Trump threatened a total trade embargo on Spain. And so basically to stop trading with Spain altogether. Now, I mentioned the threat of a trade embargo is complicated because you would have to be against the European Union, the single market as a whole. But they could do stuff targeting specific countries if they wanted to. If they had time to. I don't know how they keep on top of all of the tariffs that they're putting on all of the different countries. But anyway, then another very contrasting example was the reaction of the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, who sat in a room with Trump and jointly criticized Spain. So said, we've been trying to get them to spend more on their military and they're not doing it, and we're trying to convince them, and really seemed to kind of team up with Trump, the bully, in criticizing Spain. So these developments have more than divided the EU. I mean, it's there's a very discordant response. I don't think there's any clear answer at the moment about how to produce a unified response here. It's like the problem of the simultaneous dependence on Washington, but also the complicatedness of that alliance just seems to be like a dissolving agent when it comes to EU unity. It's really difficult. How does Ireland distinguish itself? Well, I think we heard a little bit earlier from Mícheál Martin about how kind of Ireland is trying to manage this. That Ireland is not putting its head above the parapet to criticise the US, and a lot of that has to do with the economic dependence of Ireland on the US. At the same time, it's neutral. I think that mainly the strategy is going to just be to try and keep your head down and not be in the firing line, and try to minimise the damage from things that we don't have control over. Unfortunately, what it really illustrates is the missed opportunity, which was amply illustrated by the invasion of Ukraine, which is that dependence on fossil fuels comes with this huge geopolitical risk, because they tend to come from these countries which are, let's say, unstable or liable to disruption for geopolitical reasons. The response to that could be was identified as being the need to develop reliable, independent energy sources, mostly in the form of renewable energy. But for some reason, the countries across Europe have been very slow to actually put that rhetoric into action, to actually take the steps that were required to reduce that dependency.
Yeah, it is something kind of remarkable. I mean, it's not just geopolitical either. We've known, and we've been talking kind of nonstop for the last 30 years about how if we don't move away from fossil fuels, the literal planet will go on fire and never come back, and we will go extinct.
It will no longer sustain life.
So,
obviously, a problem.
That's never been convincing enough a reason to stop it. So people have to say, hold on. You'll get more money if you do. And people go, oh, hold on, money? You know, it is one of the sad things about human nature. But I mean, but let's put that aside.
It's about urgency and imminency and and
personal like relation. That this affects me, unlike humanity's extinction. But yeah, even putting that aside. Absolutely. This, I mean, and it wouldn't have to be coming from an unstable place for this to be a good idea, surely.
Yeah.
Like if this was coming from the US, let's say if all of our oil came from the US and what's happening in the US just happened, that would be an issue too. Like the stable places can change as well. You can't, rely on this.
Yeah.
But also like there comes to a point where it's like, hold on, what's the upshot? Like what's the good part about sticking to fossil fuels? What's left about, like, they're smelly, they pollute, they destroy our cities, they kill us quite literally when we breathe them in, they cost a fortune, they're volatile, they're geopolitically explosive, and they're going to cause life on Earth to cease existing. Like, what's wrong with wind energy so much? You know, why wouldn't, like, and it will make us independent, like, as a country. I mean, Ireland has been criticised, of course, for failing to keep up, right, with energy renewability by EU standards again and again. Missing our targets
that we committed to and chose ourselves.
And the same thing, I mean, we've been treating that like this homework that we have to do for teacher on Monday morning, and oh my god, I can't believe I have to do the homework. I mean, that's the way that the Irish government has been looking at that, apparently. But then it shows out that, like, oh look, now we're illiterate and we can't read and there's nobody around to help us.
It's like, wouldn't it be a really good idea if way more people had heat pumps rather than we're relying on the oil vehicle to come and refill their heating tank?
Yeah. And when you think, we made an episode years ago, Naomi, about electricity.
Yeah.
And we talked about the installation of the world's biggest hydroelectric plant at that point, which was on the Shannon River at Limerick. At that point, Ireland had been independent for 3 years. It was 1925. And we built the world's biggest hydroelectric plant for exactly the same reasons. It was political reasons of energy independence. Because until that point, we were getting coal from the United Kingdom and it was very expensive. And we were reliant on the United Kingdom for energy. And we built an entire electrical grid as an independent nation during a time when we were strapped for cash, when we had absolutely nothing. From memory, I think they spent 20% of the entire state's budget on that hydroelectric plant.
Wow.
You know, and it was about independence. That was about political independence. Why wouldn't we ever think about doing something like that now? We don't even build buses now. I mean, there is in the village where I come from, there is a bus stop being built.
There's a bus stop,
And it's on it's in the local newspaper, and it's on the local website. I mean, the Instagram account, like plans of it, pictures of the planned bus stop. Because so little infrastructure has ever been built there, you know, like this is the kind of stuff that we're dealing with. We shouldn't be dealing with the fact that bus lines are alien to us. We should be building the world's biggest hydroelectric plant or something. I mean, listen, that's probably not a good idea now. The equivalent, you know, like what? Sorry, I'm ranting now. But for Ireland in particular, as a small, very vulnerable, neutral nation, this should be our thing, right? Building ourselves up, and making sure we're independent.
And we do have resources because we do get those big Atlantic storms, the big weather. So wind energy, tidal energy, stuff like that. It is there for the taking.
No shortage of wind.
Yeah, no shortage of wind, certainly.
Could you get rain powered something?
We could certainly, do something with it.
That's something for a young science fair. I think that's a good idea. Look into that. Rain powered electricity.
So a not unrelated issue is that according to reporting by some of my colleagues at the Irish Times, some US companies have started moving investment out of Ireland. Now these are words to strike panic into the hearts of government ministers. But this is according to documents that were released by Freedom of Information, which cited the US ambassador in Ireland as having said this. It seems that some US companies have been cancelling plans. So Amazon apparently cancelled a plan for an expansion, a data centre, something that was going to be built. And this is partly to do with planning, the lengthy planning process, but also limitations on the energy supply, unclear energy supply, also energy grid. Now, to be honest, the data centre expansion in Ireland that's taken place already is enough to kind of strain the grid. So it might not be a terrible thing if no more are built, but it does, again, reflect lack of infrastructural planning. But also, I mean, I do think it's quite interesting that this guy, this ambassador thinks this is a process that's already underway. So US companies are already diverting investment out of Ireland, or like planning, moving investment somewhere else that could have had to have taken place in Ireland. Because I think it is something that no one expected that it could last forever the way it has been in recent years, right? But still, the words to the effect that it is already underway is still going to come as a surprise, certainly, I think, especially to like policymakers in Ireland.
Nobody expects a Spanish Armada, right? But I mean, we have been here before. It's almost as if we have like very in-depth experience of a housing bubble that everyone knew wasn't going to last forever, but we're still shocked to see stopped.
Yeah.
I mean, all the more reason, of course, to look to the future and start diversifying like they're doing. But I mean, I suppose this is quite a dependence that we've managed to get ourselves onto.
Yeah, definitely. You know, your remark there reminds me, like, I was on a different podcast recently, the Inside Politics podcast, and I was asked, like, oh, you know, doesn't the Iran war kind of illustrate how terribly vulnerable the European economy is, you know, because of the energy costs? And yes, that is true. But I was kind of reflecting afterwards, and I was kind of thinking, you know what? The economy that I'm worried about isn't actually so much Europe's, although of course, you know, I'm not saying everything's going to be great, but like I'm actually more worried about the US economy. To me, it seems much more vulnerable to shocks because primarily it's such a bubble, particularly driven by AI. Now, Ireland, obviously, we've mentioned before that Ireland is totally in the slipstream of this, and it's like it's part of that bubble as well. But primarily, it's like the US economy, particularly the stock market, I just wonder whether this Iran and the effects of Iran is what kind of stops this unsustainable rally that there has been. I don't see how it can be avoided, basically. You know, given the growth of recent years being based on something which AI, which is like just based on so much hype.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the same time, of course, you do have economies that thrive on war, right? So there is like economic positives for the US, for instance, with just being at war all the time. And for Russia as well, right? From this, you know, it's a war economy in Russia, and like now
for the defense companies.
Exactly, and then things like this, like now they're selling their oil again. You know, I heard that Norway is quite happy with all this because it's just one place that has like lots of oil that people need right now, and they're not saying very very loudly that they're so happy, but they're just pumping away, just pumping that oil out of the ground. It is quite a situation.
It's just very unpredictable. Like, we can't really predict it, and like part of it is because like Iran has armed militias, armed allies in like various different parts of the world, and that automatically makes it, you know, a kind of an international conflict, or, you know, a conflict with implications for a number of different countries in ways that aren't necessarily predictable. But Tim, do you have sympathy for the people in places like Dubai, who were, you know, had this kind of Dubai dream that was suddenly rudely interrupted by incoming Iranian strikes?
This is such an interesting question, and an interesting facet of all this that I think that the internet has been quite fascinated with for the last 2 or 3 weeks since this began. Of course, there's an awful lot of Irish people among the people who have set up their lives in Dubai and the UAE. In general, and
loads of teachers.
And nurses. I believe. Loads of teachers. There is this thing, right? It's a kind of common story that you'll hear that, let's say, a primary school teacher gets their degree in Ireland, goes off to Dubai and earns in 3 years what they would have earned maybe in 15 years back home, and then comes back home with all their wealth and etc. And during this time lives a life of relative luxury in a kind of compound situation where they never really leave their kind of walled community and live this, I mean, the life of an expat in the purest sense of the word, you know, because I mean, you know, you often hear this criticism of people calling themselves expats when they're immigrants or emigrants, and saying call yourself an immigrant, actually that's what you are. But these people aren't immigrants, they are expats. I mean, there is no real way to call them anything but expats. I mean, this is a purely kind of luxury filled experience that they're having.
You just go from your air-conditioned house into your air-conditioned air-conditioned car into the air-conditioned mall.
To the air-conditioned hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And you earn enough money, hopefully, to go back and to have a deposit for a house. I think that's basically the idea.
That's the idea, yeah. To build up a bit of capital, I suppose,
Yeah.
while you're over there. Now, there's all kinds of criticisms about this, of course, mainly because of the slave labor that has been involved in the economies, creation of these economies in the middle of the desert. Not to mention the sheer excess of this lifestyle that has been constructed in the middle of the desert. The fact that it is in the middle of the desert in the first place is kind of one of the more distasteful parts of this, just pumping in like God knows how much fresh water to make like gardens in this desert for rich people, basically. And there's been a lot of chitter, Twitter online about influencers who are flocking back, including lots of Irish influencers who are out there. That's such an interesting facet of this, isn't it, Naomi?
Yeah. I guess being exposed to war, risks of conflict wasn't part of the package. It wasn't, part of that picture that was sold. So there was a huge panic because, the airspace was shut down across the Middle East, including, Dubai, UAE and so on, and people couldn't leave. And, the Iranian attacks targeted not just military bases, but also civilian infrastructure. So, there were attacks coming down. People felt very uncertain, and I think more of the panic was fueled by the fact that you couldn't leave, so there weren't planes out and stuff, and you had people paying a lot to cross borders by cars and travel by private plane and all this kind of stuff going on. And then it was really interesting to see it play out in the internet because a lot of people gloated. Watching this, there was a perception that these people were of enormous privilege and had benefited from an immoral, societal setup, and that there was a gloating at their misfortune, which I think is very unfair. I mean, these are just ordinary human beings like anyone else. It's not they're not like fictional characters, basically.
Yeah, and there's missiles falling on them.
Exactly.
Like this isn't actually, it doesn't serve them right in any way, like for God's sake. This is, whether they expected this or not, it is happening to them. No, it is very distasteful to kind of gloat about it, I agree. I think it has brought to people's attention the influencer economy that existed there in the first place in a way that people hadn't fully kind of digested already. And that might be part of this. I mean, there's been a lot of discourse on what is, I suppose, still, but what has been happening in Dubai as concerns these influencers. And this is basically involves you fitting the bill of what the Dubai authorities, the UAE, I should say, the UAE authorities identify as a worthwhile influencer, and then they give you what you use the word package, but they just give you a package. Like they invite you over, they set you up in a luxurious lifestyle, and the idea is that you spend your time taking pictures of yourself having a martini on the balcony and at sunset or whatever. And the whole thing is based around, and this is where a lot of the criticism comes in, the whole thing is based around material wealth.
And it's producing propaganda for that particular government.
Right. So it's all like, it's a kind of like pictures in front of a Ferrari. Pictures at a private beach. Pictures in a luxury hotel. It's all kind of aspirational lifestyle stuff that's being sold back home, exactly like you say, as this kind of look where Dubai is.
It is almost inescapable. I don't use TikTok very much currently, but for a certain point I was kind of delving into TikTok a bit. And this stuff was inescapable. And I got a bit self-conscious about what did the algorithm think about me, because it kept showing me this content which was all about how wonderful it was to marry a Muslim person and go to live in the Gulf and dress modestly and have a life of wonderful luxury as a Western woman. And I was like, what does the app think about me? Or is it me? I'm lingering on this out of sort of like appalled fascination, or what is it that it keeps giving me this stuff? But it was relentless. And there's whole, like you say, there's so many accounts dedicated to this. But yeah, Iranian missiles wasn't part of the picture and promise of that. Which is kind of interesting. And to be fair, it interferes somewhat with the whole strategy of these countries, which was to present themselves as safe places for investment, safe places for high earning knowledge workers to be based and for businesses to come and invest, and and low risk. That was what they sold themselves as, and this is very kind of disturbing to all of that configuration.
I think there was a rhetoric among some of the more gloaty people, I suppose, who did go there. There was a rhetoric of this place is safer than Europe is, or the US is, that like those places are kind of dirty backwaters, like crime, etc., and that this place has been cleaned up. And there's like a very kind of right-wing edge to that sentiment, like policed and like law and order. And
it's openly pro-authoritarian in some cases. I mean, there was a whole meme took off after this about how people were calm because they trusted the authorities in that place, and we're talking about hereditary rulers. And the other thing is kind of an interesting wrinkle to this is actually the authorities in a number of Gulf countries have really not liked the content that's been created, which is capturing the aftermath, the Iranian missiles. And I think Irish citizens have actually been advised by the government not to post a content about this stuff for fear of running afoul of the authorities. So we're not in favor of people freely sharing content like that.
I believe people have been arrested for showing the footage of missiles.
So it's kind of a little bit ironic, given the open kind of cultivation of social media accounts. People with large social media followings in those countries.
Well, Naomi, I think it is safe to say this is a quite turbulent St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick's Day 2026, quite a lot going on in the world. As we speak, Mícheál Martin is getting ready to say hello to Donald Trump. So if anything interesting happens in that meeting, we may come back to you over on Patreon and talk a little bit more about it.
Indeed.
Yeah. In any case, you should always go over and check what we have put up lately on Patreon. You can find over 100 extra pieces of content that we call half pints, shorter little episodes, sometimes quite long episodes, where we talk about all kinds of things, sometimes do debriefs on our main episodes. And you can find that at www.patreon.com/The Irish Passport. And when you sign up, you will be supporting the podcast along the way.
Thank you so much for listening, and slán for now.
Slán, Láil Pádraig, Chanaíomh.